Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, August 29th, 2022, and today we're going to be talking about the Trafalgar Group and a brand new poll from the state of Wisconsin detailing the 2022 midterm elections. Now, the Trafalgar Group is a Republican pollster that has historically been at least somewhat accurate when it comes down to Rust Belt states. They did not poll the state of Wisconsin back in 2016, but they did poll the race in the states of Michigan and Pennsylvania. They ended up being the only accurate pollsters across the entirety of these states, getting Michigan off by just less than 2 points, predicting the eventual winner when practically no other poll was able to. And when I say that, I mean it. Looking at the state of Pennsylvania, a very similar story as well, where every single poll showed Hillary Clinton ahead. Ultimately, Trafalgar called it for President Trump, and he ended up winning. They've had some inaccuracies in the past, though. They did call the 2020 election incorrectly. They said that President Trump was going to win the state of Pennsylvania, and he did not. So it's not a perfect science, and they haven't had any historical polls within the state of Wisconsin. But what I will say is that looking at the presidential election results from the past, taking a look at the accuracy in 2016 and many other states in 2018 and 2020, I tend to trust Trafalgar at least to be the baseline for the Democratic Party. I don't know if entirely that I trust it to be the most accurate pollster in every single state because they have been off. They said Trump would win Georgia. They said the runoffs would go to the GOP, and obviously that did not happen. But again, we do have to take it for what it's worth, and specifically in the Rust Belt region, they honestly have been pretty accurate. So in new polls released from the state, we find that in the state of Wisconsin, the Democrat Mandela Barnes, the lieutenant governor of Wisconsin, is leading Senator Ron Johnson. Now, the reason why this is so significant is because I have not been talking much about the state of Wisconsin, and for what I thought was good reason. Ron Johnson was down in the polls in 2016 when he won the election by 3.4% statewide. It was quite an embarrassing showing for the Democratic Party that they lost a race where they thought that they were shored up going to be winning in that election, and that simply didn't happen. When you take a look at the polling data throughout the entirety of the campaign season, Ron Johnson never once led his opponent, even at different points being down 11 points statewide. If you don't know why, Russ Feingold actually was the senator who was before Ron Johnson, who lost in 2010, came back in 2016 for a comeback bid, but ultimately ended up losing. In 2010, the polls were actually overestimating of Ron Johnson's support. This was a very good year for the GOP, nowhere near what this year is going to be in terms of a downside actually for the GOP. 2022 is likely to be worse for them than 2010 by many, many metrics that we have seen thus far. But in 2016, what Ron Johnson was able to do was defy the expectations and outperform the polls in a very similar fashion to the way that President Trump was able to do in the 2016 election. So when you see the underestimation, the overestimation, you might be a little bit uneasy about this poll, about whether or not you can actually trust it. And what I will say is, again, the floor for Democrats is typically set by Republican internals and typically set by pollsters that Republican lean, such as the Trafalgar Group. Mandela Barnes being at 49.4% is entirely, and I say this with a true heart, entirely out of the expectation that I had for this state. I have not had Wisconsin as a blue state on my map for a very long time, and the reason being is that Biden barely won the state, and honestly, Democrats didn't have that much of an impressive performance back in 2018. When they were facing Governor Scott Walker in the governor's race in 2018, the Democrats only won by 1.1%. Knowing that the national environment was about plus 8 points for the Democrats nationwide, and yet Wisconsin, a state that voted for Obama by solid margins in the past, was barely going towards the Democrats, there was a bit of a surprise there. But I will also say that the Senate election was much better for the Democratic Party than the governor election was as well. But 2 years later, it ended up going to Joe Biden by just 0.6%. For reference, in 2012, Obama won it by 7 despite the Republican Party's vice presidential running mate hailing from the state of Wisconsin. And in 2008, the state of Wisconsin went to the Democrats by 14 points. So to see Biden win the state by less than a point meant that there was some significant shift here that had been ingrained within the state's politics now. And it also meant that if Biden was to be so much as a point less popular than he was in 2020, that Wisconsin would be a foregone conclusion for the Democratic Party, especially facing off against an incumbent. But that simply isn't the case. As I have said, I have always doubted the Democratic Party's ability to win in the state of Wisconsin. The last time I had it as a blue state was probably in August of 2021. Yes, August of 2021. And that was in a point where it looked like Ron Johnson was actually not going to be running for re-election. He took a very long time to announce. He was pressured by Mitch McConnell, President Trump, because they knew that in congressional races, you always want an incumbent. Now, the state of Wisconsin in specific, they definitely needed an incumbent, and seeing it now against a Republican incumbent, I understand why. The state of Wisconsin was facing off against many top contenders on the Democratic side, but none more powerful, so it seems, than Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes. You have someone who is in a statewide position, you have someone with name recognition, and you also have a senator who is unpopular, and sure, maybe an open race Republican could have done better, but honestly, congressional incumbency is always a very important factor. In 2016, Ron Johnson had an approval rating lower than the percentage of the vote share that he got, so he has proven in the past that approval rating doesn't always correlate with actual vote share. But what I will say is that these numbers are definitely alarming. Again, it has been over a year since I have had Wisconsin as a blue state, but I'm coming to a realization that maybe it might be. I still think that Ron Johnson pulls out ahead, but this lead for Mandela Barnes is definitely a good sign. Knowing the polling numbers in the past, about 90%, 80% of undecided voters at this point typically break for the GOP, which is why, you're talking about the floor for the Democratic Party if they're already getting it now, but the GOP definitely has room to grow. I think this race is going to be one of the most competitive races that we see this election cycle, when quite honestly, it should be a lockdown. In 2016, Ron Johnson won by 3.4%. A 3.4% victory when President Trump didn't even win the popular vote. The generic ballot went to the GOP by less than a point. I mean, 2022 was supposed to be such a substantially good year for the GOP, and that's simply not what's happening. The state of Wisconsin in specific has Mandela Barnes ahead, which I think really tells us that there is something going on within this Senate race, because it isn't just Trafalgar that is showing us that the Democrats are leading in Wisconsin. It's also Fox News. It's also plenty of other reputable pollsters. It was just on my end that I thought that this was a similar 2016 overestimation, but when a Republican pollster as well respected amongst the GOP as Trafalgar comes in and shows that Mandela Barnes is ahead, it generally tells us that Mandela Barnes probably is ahead or is narrowly in the plurality over the Republican in terms of the actual sentiment across the state. Again, the undecideds, I think, in November will ultimately break for the GOP, and I don't think that Democrats can really count on maintaining this upward mobility that the Biden administration has been experiencing over the past couple of weeks. The increase in approval certainly has proven to be helpful. The increase in the generic ballot has certainly proven to be helpful, but there's no guarantee that sticks. The state of Wisconsin at this point still has a Republican incumbent, defied expectations in 2016, and honestly speaking, I don't think I'll ever come to a point where I'm comfortable saying the Democratic Party is on track to win Wisconsin by a very large margin. If anything, it's going to be exceptionally close. But as I said, these are not the only numbers that we see that show Mandela Barnes ahead. On average, he's up by about 4 points. Trafalgar has him up by 2, Fox News has him up by 4, and Marquette has him up by 7. Marquette is a very interesting pollster because they were also very accurate in years past. You take a look at the 2016 Senate elections. Marquette said that Baldwin would win by 11. She won by 11. You look back at also the governor's race here. Let's see what they said. I believe they actually predicted the incorrect winner. They overestimated the GOP. They said there would be a tie and that also Scott Walker would win by 1. Tony Evers ended up winning by about 2. So depending on when the poll was taken, depending on what you're looking at here, what you found was that the results either A, underestimated the GOP or got it spot on. It's not perfectly accurate. Marquette has been incorrect in the past, as has practically been every other pollster. But to see Mandela Barnes ahead on this poll by 7 points is quite substantial. I will also say that my expectations in the governor's race are quite different based off of what I've seen from this poll, and not just this poll alone. The race between Tim Michels and Tony Evers has narrowed down to a 1.6% lead. It looks like Mandela Barnes is going to outrun Tony Evers. And the reason why that's so surprising is because Tony Evers is a mildly popular governor. I mean, he is the one who's on the top of the ticket. Mandela Barnes was underneath him. But now that they are both running for statewide elected positions, well, guess what? For some reason, the governor's race is more inclined to go to the GOP, defying expectations, especially when it comes down to issues of congressional redistricting, when it comes down to issues of abortion, when it comes down to an issue of voting rights and a legitimization of the presidential election, whatever it might be. The Democratic Party is lagging behind in the governor's race, up by 2, 3, and a tie, when the Senate race is going to the Democrats by 7, 2, and 4 points. In every single poll, consistently, there is an an outperformance for Mandela Barnes over the governor, who actually led them to victory back in 2018, which is quite surprising. But as I've been saying, Now that we take a look at the ratings within the state of Wisconsin, we are in a position where the race is now a toss-up. It's not just these polls, it's also a combination of expert rating changes and just a realization that Wisconsin is becoming more competitive. Ron Johnson now, according to 538, has a 53% chance at victory, and while that chance at victory was completely off in 2016, I tend to trust the data that got it right in 2018, got it right in 2020, and while I may have overestimated Democrats, again, I stand by my point that I think Ron Johnson wins in the state of Wisconsin. We can recognize when a race is getting close. Democrats probably still won't win it, but the race is definitely narrowing up. 53-47 is a very good sign for the Democratic Party, especially since in the beginning of June, we started out with the GOP having about a 3/4 chance of victory, or 77% across the state. That narrowed down narrowly to about 72%. It started to decrease. Then it took a big dip following the releasing of Marquette University's polls. In addition to Fox News, it went down to 60-40. It got closer. And now that you have one of the most reputable Republican pollsters coming out with practically an internal saying that Ron Johnson is down, the margin is down to 53-47 in terms of chances at victory. But the reason why Ron Johnson is still ahead, despite the polling numbers showing it moving towards the Democrats, is because we are working within what we call the deluxe model, outlined by 538, which includes fundraising numbers, polling data, past voting history, and expert ratings. Expert ratings usually takes weeks, if not months, to change the electoral ratings about certain states. And it becomes very difficult to start to see rapid changes because typically, even if a poll was released today showing Mandela Barnes up by 20 points, it would still take a bit of time in order for the Cook Political Report to convene and make a race rating change, or Larry Sabato's crystal ball, or Inside Elections, or whatever it might be, whatever resource you look at. This isn't something that is done immediately. So it doesn't really move with the times. It's what we would call a lagging indicator. But in the classic model, that's when they take everything else in and just remove the expert ratings, some of which were created practically months ago. The classic model, however, now has Mandela Barnes ahead. For the first time on 538 history, Mandela Barnes leads in the classic model. It's very similar to the model that we saw with Deluxe. It narrowly decreased, but generally about a 3/4 chance of victory during the starting of the campaign season, or the starting of the general election season and the election forecast. But it got narrower and narrower, now to a point where if you take out some of the outdated expert ratings, Mandela Barnes is actually the favorite to win the race. This is a race that nobody thought would be able to be turned around. Many people saw Mandela Barnes as this sacrificial lamb. Now he stands as a very, very viable option for the Democratic Party. He seems to be doing a lot right. Voters seem to be positively responding to that, and even the Republican internals can't find numbers that show Ron Johnson ahead. This is shocking, to say the least. I truly thought when we knew that Trafalgar was releasing data in the state of Wisconsin that it would revert us back to the general understanding that Republicans are ahead, especially when the year, like 2022, is significantly better, or supposed to be at least, significantly better for the GOP than 2020 and 2018, 2 years with extremely close Wisconsin statewide races. But that simply is not the case. I don't know what can entirely explain it. Maybe it's Ron Johnson's level of disapproval. Maybe it's Mandela Barnes' ability to connect with voters and increase turnout and increase the Democratic Party's vote share. I don't know what it is entirely. But what I can say, there is something going right for the Democratic Party, and it's unlike anything that we ever expected from the state of Wisconsin. And when you jump over to the light model, that chance jumps up to 70%, giving the Democrats a whopping 81% chance at winning control of the U.S. Senate. You go to Deluxe and you see the difference from 81 to 67, but still a very good look for the Democrats. Back in June, Republicans had a 60% chance of victory. And based off the classic model, 77 for the Democratic Party. A significant increase that has been led by the data and also just the change in electorate to a point where now the average seats controlled by party 51 to 49, meaning that Democrats, in many cases, including the Deluxe model, come out ahead with a net gain in a year that was meant to be such an abysmal and cataclysmic year for the Democratic Party overall. I have been extremely impressed by the newfound ability for Democrats to do well in Wisconsin. As I said, I mean, it's not just the polls, it's not just the forecast, it's not just the betting markets. Everything is telling us that Wisconsin should be on the radar for a potential pickup opportunity for the Democratic Party, whereas quite literally months ago, that simply was not the case. It's Fox News, it's Marquette, it's Trafalgar, it's every single reputable A-rated pollster within the state of Wisconsin that is telling us the race is going towards the Democrats. The governor's race, on the other hand, a lot closer. Tony Evers is in a position where Tim Michels probably can edge him out, despite Mandela Barnes likely pulling ahead of Ron Johnson, at least if the election was held right now. But the election isn't being held right now, and a lot of reflection will have to go into this race and understanding about whether or not Democrats are on track to truly win the state of Wisconsin. My bet is still that Republicans win both the governor's race and the Senate race as of right now. I think that's where I am comfortable characterizing the state of Wisconsin at this point. But what I will say is that the numbers out of Wisconsin are quite good for the Democratic Party in the Senate elections, which means that, honestly speaking, they are on track right now, if everything holds true, for a pickup in the U.S. Senate in a year that was meant to be a complete and total pushback against national Democrats, to a point where in different times and different predictions, Republicans were up 56 to 44, but that no longer 54 to 46. And that is no longer the case. It has become very difficult to see how we could even imagine ourselves back in a position of 54 to 46, but the GOP definitely has fallen off far and hard, likely because of the decision from the United States Supreme Court that has pretty much doomed many Republicans this election season, despite it being a year that they ultimately should have been easily landsliding their own elections. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.